when I sent you an email.
A very, very long email.
I was fashion forward even in my youth.
And you...
Hey team, welcome to today's video. If you are new here, my name is Hayden. I am a group exercise instructor. If you are a returning team member, welcome back to my channel. Today we are doing a little story time. I'm going to tell my story of when I came out. So the year is 2005. That is when I first moved to Melbourne from Mildura, where I was living at that present point in time. Now 2005, the novelty of email was still there. I was a baby-faced, naive young man. But before I dive into my journey into the coming out story, let me give you a bit of backstory. I was born and raised in Broken Hill, New South Wales. It is a very, very, very remote country town. If you are unfamiliar with Broken Hill, then perhaps you are more familiar with the movies Mad Max and Priscilla, Drag Queen of the Desert, because both of those were filmed in Broken Hill, among other films and TV shows. There was some time where we lived on a remote area. Being a country town, way back in early 90s to early 2000s, being gay and being out, especially in Broken Hill, was just not a thing. You just didn't do it. Now, I did get bullied a lot at school because I don't know how. I wasn't overly camp, I don't believe. And Mum could probably correct me. Maybe I was. But kids generally know when someone's different. And so I would be bullied, being called a faggot, all of that sort of stuff. All the way, well, it started in early primary school. That's what we call kind of middle school in Australia, especially New South Wales, to early to mid high school. It stopped around year 11 and 12 because one, that's when I started fighting back, and two, the idiots who had been bullying me either failed and were kicked out or dropped out. Fast forward into my first stint at uni, which was coincidentally my first time away from home, and then we move into when I lived in Mildura by myself with two other female housemates. Throughout this entire period of my life, I obviously knew that I was different. I was not that interested in girls, even though I did have a couple of girlfriends, I guess you would call them. I never had a traditional relationship with a girl before, but there you have it. Even when we moved from Broken Hill to Mildura, Mildura is a slightly larger, it is a rural city, it's a slightly larger country town, I guess you could call it. So similar to the growing up experience in Broken Hill, where being gay, being different from the norm is just not accepted, and you do not come out while you're in those areas. Mildura was pretty much the same cut and paste kind of deal. Now, because I was a chef, that is predominantly a male dominated industry. When I was apprenticing at both the RSL, where I worked, and then Enjoy Wine Cafe, which was a more upmarket kind of a venue. It was attached to the Winter Sun Resort Hotel. I was heavily in the closet, and closeted gays know what I'm talking about. When you go through the rigmarole of trying to butch it up, you pretend that you're interested in things that you're just not interested in. You have to have those conversations with, you know, your trade mates around, you know, women, girls, dating, the sex talks, all of that kind of deal. Well, let me tell you, it's not very comfortable as a gay man trying to pretend that you're getting just as much action as the straight boys. Now, it wasn't actually until 2003-ish where I had graduated, I had achieved all of the things that I wanted to achieve academically. I had also graduated as an apprentice chef, so I was a fully fledged chef. That's when I started to actually start chatting to guys on various online apps. Now, back then, there was no such thing as Grindr and Scruff and all of that sort of stuff. It was all done on the internet, which made it so much more interesting. It's kind of like when you're in the closet, it's kind of like an extreme sport when you need to make sure that, especially if it's a family computer, you need to make sure that the history is wiped, that you go in and you completely wipe it in all avenues, because heaven forbid that you get discovered. So I started chatting to guys, predominantly, there were a few that I chatted to in Mildura when I was there, and you started getting into the random kind of hookup scenario. The first few were very awkward because it was obviously a new experience to me with a man. I have been with women before. Pretty certain Gator was the website of choice. It was Gator and Manhunt, I believe. They were the two that were the most used or the most popular back then. I started chatting, like I said before, I started chatting to this guy that lived in Melbourne. And funnily enough, he's actually the brother of one of my very good female friends currently. And I've remained friends with her up until this point. So as I was graduating, I was doing all that stuff, and I was getting more and more interested in him. He was the one who said, you know, well, why don't, rather than living in the closet or living a life that isn't you, why don't you, you know, take the next step and think about moving? He never said move to Melbourne or anything like that. I just thought of that. I guess it was because he lived there, and like I said before, I was very young and I was very naive and very inexperienced in the world of actual relationships. So we get to around 2004. By this point in time, I had been with a few guys. I had been chatting to this one guy in particular over this period of time. It was towards the end of 2004 that I made the choice to finish up work, to pack all my things into the car and drive to Melbourne and start a new life. And that's exactly what I did. And a 6.5 hour drive later, here I am in Melbourne. When I first arrived, I had an arrangement with a friend of a friend, and I crashed on his couch for a month or two. And that was before I got my first housemate in Coburg. All in the while, I had started seeing this guy that I had been chatting to. Now I'm gonna change his name just for privacy purposes. So we're just gonna call him Cody. Now Cody and I hit it off from the start. Again, I need to remind you, I was very young and very naive. So the warning signs that usually would be there, I wasn't paying attention to because I had rose-colored glasses on and all that. We started seeing each other and we ended up being together for a year and a bit, just under 2 years. And that is my cat trying to ruin my story time. He was the one who gave me the courage to come out. So it's now 2005, and the reason I brought up email is because that's how I came out. I sent an email to my mum coming out of the closet, telling her my dirty little secret. Now I honestly don't remember the entirety of everything that I wrote, but it was along the lines of, I love you, I just wanted to be me, it's okay if you don't want to talk to me again, can you tell Dad and Holly and Wes, so Wes is my eldest brother, just let them know that I love them, I understand if it's too much for you to accept, yada yada yada. All in the while as I'm writing this, there's tears coming down, there's the feeling of uncertainty and fear and what if, the loneliness is piled up upon layer and layer and layer. But I found the courage and I pushed send and off it went. Here I am thinking, I'm probably never going to hear from my family again. But another part of me was just so happy. And so I felt free in a way. I was living my life transparently and honestly to its truest capacity. Maybe not even an hour later, because I remember I had texted Cody when I was at the train station, because I lived, like I said before, I lived in Collingwood at the time, and he lived in Richmond, and I had to get a tram into the city and then get a train out to where he was, and I was on my way to his place. And I remember texting him saying, I've emailed my mum, I came out, blah, 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 blah. As I pressed send on that text, my phone rang and it was Mum. So obviously Mum's number and name comes up on the screen of the phone. And I shit myself. So it took a few rings for me to actually get the courage to answer the phone and shakingly put it up to my ear. One, Mum was calling me, and two, the words that came out of her mouth were along the lines of, "We don't care, we love you." Now, at that point in time, I was on the train, taking the phone call, crying like there's no tomorrow. And Mum was like, there was a conversation, I was blubbering like a mess. And I do remember Mum saying, "Your father is here. Do you want to talk to him?" Now, to give you a snapshot of my dad is a typical country man's man. He was a mechanic, a builder, a jack of all trades, into the footy, liked all of the ockery, blokey stuff. So again, there was another level of shitting myself. Dad hopped on the phone and he said the same thing. It was a mirror of Mum, and it was, "We love you, we don't care." Let's get Mum's perspective.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm okay. Yourself?
I'm good. Now, I'm telling my story of how I came out. Obviously, there's a camera right here as I'm telling the story. So I will be looking off into the lens as well as looking at the phone. I'm talking to both of you at the same time. Now, I'm up to the part where I've told my backstory. I grew up in Broken Hill, where it was a very remote country town. Being something that's different from the norm was not hugely accepted. You know, the bullying and all of that stuff. And now we're fast forward up to 2005 when I sent you an email.
A very, very long email.
Yes, and I gave the brief version. But what was your memory of that email?
About bloody time. That memory of that email was like, you went on and on and on, and how apologetic you were, and it's not your fault, and all that kind of stuff, which we knew that already, but we'd had already kind of guessed, you know, probably at the age of 12.
It's funny because I was telling my backstory and I was like, you know, sometimes kids just know. Like, I don't understand why I was picked on because, like, was I super camp?
No, not at all. You were very quiet. You were very different in the way you dressed. You wouldn't let anybody dress, God knows, remember. Anybody.
Yeah.
You know, I would buy you clothes and then you would order them. I'm like, I just spent good money on that.
I was fashion forward even in my youth.
And you were your own person. And I think that's why those bullies did what they did. And God knows, karma would have already come around for them by now.
Yep. And they have for most of them.
Yeah.
So back to the email. Do you remember the phone call afterwards when you called me?
And I can vaguely remember, because I said, okay, I'm going to ring him now. And I'm like, and we both said, oh, about bloody time. We've only been waiting for you to say it, so now let's all just get along with it. And you were very, very upset at the time.
I do. I just said to them, I remember I was on the train and blubbering like a mess.
That's correct. And we're like, it's done now, son. It makes no difference to me at all. Never did. You're my son.
What was the conversation that you had with Dad? So I remember he got on the phone as well and he said like a similar message that you had. But what was the conversation you had with Dad about the email?
Okay, I said, Glee's just emailed us. And he said, okay. So he read the email. He came and read the email. And he goes, he just shrugged his shoulders and he looked at me and smiled. He goes, I said, I think he just needs reassuring that we're not, you know, we're not against him, we don't hate him. And your father, he said, well, we've known him for 5 years. But we can't just say, oh, he's my son who's gay, then he hadn't even come in. So I wouldn't say that anyway because, you know, it's not my place. And I feel for kids that come out or their parents don't want anything to do with them, and I call them hypocrites because they're just, I mean, you love your child regardless.
That's the way it should be. But unfortunately for some individuals, that's not the way it goes.
I know. But you can't help everybody. You just give them the confidence that they can go forward in life, which is what we did with you. You know, like, go into it, what do you want to do? It's an open book now. It was not open book when you came out, or even after your school days. It was frowned upon. It was talked about.
Yeah, there's a lot of derogatory comments and jokes and...
So, but nowadays, it's an open book. So you are who you are, and you just move forward with that.
Before I go into my usual sign off, because we have reached the end of today's video, summarize the message that my mum and myself were trying to send, and that's don't be afraid to be who you are, who you truly are. No matter what that may look like, no matter how different it is to the current you, the person you're pretending to be. We've all heard the cliche, we all know that drugs and alcohol and all of that stuff doesn't really do much for you, well, doesn't do anything for you other than makes you feel happy at that present point in time. I'm just speaking about my personal experience. Numbing the turmoil that you're putting up with on the inside only leads to more issues later on if you don't address the real problem. If you're going through this, if you have been through this, if you're thinking about going through your own coming out journey, tell me your story, let me know. Ask me questions. If I can help you, I would be more than happy to. Thanks for watching, team. Make sure we do the fun stuff, but most importantly, stay tuned.